Hello, I'm Kai Rosga, and welcome to Version Up, one lawyer's journey to digitally transform his legal practice. The good news for law firms? Most already have the building blocks to innovate on their operating model for the AI era. My guest today, Rok Popov Ledinski, explains why. Rok is a developer and engineer turned strategic thinker and tech implementer for law firms. So on this episode, I put on my BigLaw hat and ask him to walk me through the steps of planning, deploying, and driving adoption of technology in a business of law. Quick bottom line, taking incremental steps towards incremental gains by leveraging existing capabilities and experimentation that is anchored in the law firm's strategic positioning. What a mouthful, huh? So for those with a slightly longer attention span, check out the episode. I really think you'll enjoy it. Hi, Rok. Welcome to Version Up.
Thank you, Kai, for having me. I was really excited on coming to your podcast.
Thank you. I know you're an engineer by trade, but really an engineer turned technical advisor and strategist for lawyers. So can you tell us about what you're doing now and how you support lawyers with technology?
Yeah, it's true. I came from the engineering background. I used to work in enterprise environment, heavily regulated in finances, and after that, I moved to offering my services to smaller businesses. At some point, organically, I came across a lawyer and finished a project with a lawyer, and then word of mouth started working with others. So I kind of organically came into this space, and I thought it was very interesting. I thought that there's so many opportunities. I thought from the technical perspective, first of all, there's a lot to do in the legal space. I thought it was a text-heavy environment. So naturally, AI could be a potential solution for that. That was when I was looking at it from the more superficial perspective. And when I started diving into the ins and outs and what it means to have the attorney-client privilege, what it means, what are the professional obligations, what are some of the challenges when it came to adopting legal tech and automations before Gen AI came to the space, I moved more to advisory role. So I kind of sit somewhere between strategy, innovation specialists that do have the background of being lawyers and working with law firms and in-house teams, and then implementation specialists that are actually building these solutions. Because I just feel like there should be a bit broader perspective when you're trying to solve a problem. I think that if you're building a product, your incentive is to sell a product. I think if you're building software solutions, custom software, your incentive is to push that. But I think that any kind of solution should be looked at as any kind of problem should be looked at partially in isolation and figuring out what is the best possible solution for this particular problem without pushing your own narrative. So this is where I kind of sit today.
So if you're advising a law firm, who is the main contact you have there? Is it someone from what we call legal operations?
That would be the leadership. So it would be either straight managing partner or one of the partners. And I would collaborate later on with many different people in the firm, not necessarily always lawyers, not necessarily always legal ops, depending on what is the problem that is identified and who are the elements that are involved in the firm in that problem. I like to think about the world as problems because problems have solutions. So it's kind of optimistic.
So really, I would imagine it's very strategic in nature, the advisory you provide, because having worked at large corporate law firms most of my career, I imagine those individuals, those senior partners, do not have a lot of interest or time, frankly, in getting into the weeds on the technology.
Yeah, it's quite strategic, or so to speak, it needs to be very aligned with the strategy. The firms that I worked so far, they had a mutual denominator, which is that the incentive or the initiative to adopt technology was coming from the top. And so it spread from from the managing partner. Those were the ones that were really pushing for the change. And because you have the support of the managing partner, you're able to go and speak to other department heads, and you're able to actually do something meaningful, something that has a big potential of having a valuable result at the end.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess I have a kind of business related question for you, actually, which is I have noticed increasingly a blurring within the legal tech space between what I think of as a product company, like a tech company, versus what I think of as an advisor or a consultant. I've met with now individuals who started as one and turned into the other. I've seen it go both ways, going from sort of a product solution to being more very tailored, bespoke solutions to being really an advisor. It's a bit of a spectrum in my mind. Is that unique to the legal vertical, or is that a trend more broadly in technology markets? Or am I just seeing something that maybe is not really there?
I I think you're seeing something that's there. I'm not sure it's that specific to the legal sector. I think it's more coming out of the pain points. If I'm an advisor and solely an advisor, what trust do my clients have that I'm going to have any kind of accountability for anything I'm going to advise on if I'm not going to be there when the thing is going to be implemented? So it's more like, I think you need a set of skills, expertise, experiences. I think there's definitely advisory skills, knowing the market, knowing the options out there to solve specific problems, knowing the work good enough that you're able to understand where the problems lay, and then also some sort of project or product management, because usually the solution is not like a one-time thing that can be, just plopped on top of whatever exists. It's not like a very, very short-term thing. And then also, if you're not, how can you advise on the best possible solution if you only know 5,000 tools that are already out there? And if you don't understand really how does the data flow through those tools, what are the risks, and then also what are the capabilities? And so you got to understand a little bit of everything. And I think it's very important to understand what are your weak points so you can partner with people that can actually, help you where you're kind of stuck,
Yeah,
because nobody knows everything.
for sure. And when I think of where is the typical corporate law firm today on a path of a digital transformation, they're probably still early where they need more help with the framework, the foundation, the strategic thinking, the planning. How do you map the technology to your business model? Big picture stuff, right? And maybe not at a stage where they need to be deploying a ton of products yet. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. But then also, big firms today, they have they have a lot of processes that are already very established and baked in.
Mm.
Change is hard because usually the process doesn't begin and end within a area of the firm. It spreads through multiple departments, multiple practice areas. Just thinking of like an intake, which would be an example, right? The intake starts when a client, a prospect, contacts the firm, and it ends when that client, who is now converted to a prospect that is now converted to a client, actually gets billed. There's so many things that happens in between. There's so many people and departments involved. Some of them are legal, some of them are not. So when you're thinking about this and you're thinking of how are we going to streamline and change our intake system, first getting everybody on the same page would be a very, very hard thing to do already. So I don't think you should start with buying a tool for intake. or starting experimenting with different tools, because if people are not on the same page that there is a certain opportunity to improve the process, or there are actually problems with the process itself, if you have 50% of the actors not willing to change the process, buying a tool that does the process doesn't actually get the job done.
Yeah, you're describing to me what I think of as more of the planning that goes into deploying technology. The work up front that you do will help pay off later because you won't be taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You won't find yourself in a situation where you deployed something that no one's using. All these errors that we're seeing happening in the legal industry right now, I imagine that the planning up front is really meant to head that off.
Planning up front, but it also has to sit on a foundation, and I believe the foundation is the principles. I think that if you're not on an organizational level, if you're not clear on what is your risk appetite, what is the acceptable use, then it's really hard to maintain some sort of consistency with adoption and changing and innovation. And also planning. Planning follows all those principles that you've set. Yeah.
That's interesting. So you're coming into a new client, let's say a corporate law firm, pretty big firm, let's pretend, and they're really starting from scratch. They have the current state of art when it comes to technical infrastructure and the DMS and e-discovery tools. They have all the matter and procurement, all that stuff that a firm should have been developing, let's say in the last 10, 15 years. Let's just assume they have all that. And what they're coming to you is to really innovate. They say, Rok, our clients are asking what we're doing to innovate. How are we going to use technology to improve our services to the clients? We are asking ourselves, how do we stand out in a competitive field as a law firm? They're really starting to frame all that out. Can you walk me through what that meeting looks like with the principals early on as they're thinking through how to go from A to B to C?
Okay, so let's try. Usually, a client that I talk to already knows what is their differentiator with other competitors.
Sure.
And so thinking about how are they streamlining that differentiator, and can it even be streamlined? Because, okay, let's talk about differences between, maybe we can start here. Maybe the difference between a personal injury firm or some high stakes litigation is very different, because in high stakes litigation, you have every case is unique. In personal injury firm, also clients that are going for these types of firms, I mean, they're probably contacting 5 firms at the same time and then comparing cost and responsiveness. Those are 2 different firms. Let's say that they're the same size. Let's say that they also have the same everything that you've mentioned before, but the incentives are very different because the clientele is very different. The mentality of the clients is very different. So you mentioned that in this fictional scenario, one of the pressures is coming from clients to, okay, so clients want us to clarify how are we innovating. But also clients in high stakes litigation, they're also looking for comfort, for somebody to take responsibility, accountability, for somebody to mitigate risk. While in personal injury, it's different. In personal injury, they're looking for efficiency. They're looking for, to get the process through quickly, to close the loop quickly. From those 2 perspectives, innovation for those 2 different types of clients looks very different. And so I would say with one firm, we would be more focusing on what are the repeatable manual stuff that you have to do that could be highly standardized. And then let's tackle those. So you would have more time to spend on the things that your clients value the most. And then when it comes to personal injury, it's like literally, let's figure out how to streamline your work product, because this is what's going to differentiate you from others. But also in that, there is a big part a big part of it, of the differentiator, is the data. So every firm has a lot of data, but that data is usually not centralized. There's usually not one source of truth. And also it's not clean. And what do we mean by clean? Like there's literally, there's a way that a machine not understands, but consumes text. And giving you an example of you downloading a thread of 130 emails, there's 130 emails, 130 bodies, 130 blobs of metadata where you have the name of the sender, of the recipient, time, all that stuff. That is all noise. That should all be moved away from what is actually sent to the machine in the end. And so when we're thinking about the data, in order to operationalize that data and to really use it to be different than your competitor, that data needs to be very, very structured. So this is also a part of this is also something that needs to be planned for. And also, how are you going to assure that this is going to be streamlined down the line? Because you can't just expect that you can manually be handling such huge amounts of data. So yeah, weaponizing, so to speak, weaponizing their data, but in very different ways, depending on what are the external pressures and internal pressures. Why do you want to change? And where are you today? That is very, very important. Where are you today? Can we map your processes and can we find inefficiencies there? Because I don't think that the technology can help absolutely. I don't think that every process can be streamlined or automated, but I believe a part of it can. And figuring out where is that soft spot based on all the factors that I mentioned is where I would start.
Putting myself in the head of a senior lawyer at a major law firm, what I really find encouraging or inspiring by that answer is that before we get into identifying the problems, before we get to mapping processes, et cetera, first part of those questions you're asking were really things that I already would know about my business, about my clients, about my needs, and what are my differentiators. So I think that's actually really interesting because I think it means that the beginning of that meeting is quite comfortable for the lawyer who should already be able to really engage with that in a pretty detailed way. Now, as we get more into the next stage that you're describing, which is understanding the data and understanding the needs and mapping processes, et cetera, I imagine a question you get often early on is, Rok, what's the infrastructure we need to build out internally? What capacity do we need internally? Do I have to hire new roles? Do I need to fill new functions at the law firm? Can I leverage existing people to do this? Or are you telling me that I need to now create a budget and create a new team internally? How do you address that question?
I don't think big moves from the start really work well. You get so much backlash, so much pushback. And I think that the firm-wide initiative kind of doesn't work because there's so many different parts of the firm that tick differently. And you have people in every single area of the firm. You have people, and people are the hardest to change. We don't want to change. We want to keep on doing things how we've been doing them forever. And that doesn't mean we don't change. But I think immediately creating a huge budget or trying to determine what the budget might be without having certain answers and certain understanding of how things actually tick within the firm and already hiring roles for it. I mean, probably I'm speaking from experience, from what I've seen. Every client that I had at least a few people that could be declared champions, people that are, more experimenting in their personal lives and in their work lives with the technology. And these people tend to share their enthusiasm at their place of work. And so empowering these types of individuals, I think, pays a lot of dividends. It also shows a lot of short-term gains because, just speaking from the perspective, I wouldn't trust an outsider that I have never seen, but I would trust somebody that has been sitting next to me for a couple of years already. And when that somebody that is sitting next to me is doing something similar day to day that I'm doing, and I'm seeing how much they're making their lives easier or maybe increasing the capabilities that they had before. And it's very relatable and it's easy to understand because I understand the work they're doing, but they also know a little bit more than me, so they can show me how can I advance. And this would be the place to start. I think empowering the people that are already enthusiastic about the technology and are already a little bit MacGyvers in using it. They're able to apply it in certain areas.
Well, I got to tell you, this meeting is going great for you, Rok, because so far you've told me, look, you've got in your head a lot of what you already need, a lot of the pieces you already need to put this puzzle together. Secondly, you're telling me you don't need to blow up the budget. You don't need to do some massive overnight transformation. We can start this process going from the ground up and we can use some existing resources. So far I'm feeling really excited by this meeting. So then I'm staying in the head of this sort of senior lawyer. I guess maybe my next question would be, okay, we are an 800 lawyer law firm, a lot of different interests, a lot of different styles of working, different practice areas. And we don't know if we have the right kind of culture instilled in our organization to get people to frankly identify what they need from a technological standpoint and then actually use it, even if we gave them those solutions. How do we tackle the culture question around digital transformation?
Okay, I'm going to try. I'm not a specialist for change management. I usually partner with people that are, but I'm going to try to use the knowledge that I have gotten from them. Bear with me. But I think there's a point where you mentioned legal engineers before. If I try to figure out what is a legal engineer today, like I'm just going to be very, very confused. I tried to figure that out. I talked to a few. I went on LinkedIn and I searched for job descriptions for legal engineers. There's a lot of different vacancies, but sometimes the description is diametrically opposite. So it's really hard. But how I see them is like you have these people that understand specific practice groups. They understand the work product. They're also able to think in systems. What is the input? What is the output? What happens in the process? How can we break down the process? They're able to see how can they make the lives of small groups, small departments in the firm easier by maybe just stitching together the tools they already have, maybe introducing a small workflow, maybe, there's a great tool that actually fits the way of working. It doesn't force you to completely reinvent the way you're working. I think that in a firm with 800 lawyers, we're talking way more than 1,000 people. If there's 800 lawyers, I think that top down, what should be happening is some sort of standards of what is acceptable for us, what fits our risk appetite, and what is the overall strategy. And then what should be happening bottom up is empowering different teams within the firm to be experimenting. So giving them the infrastructure where they're able to experiment without any risk, which is possible today, technically speaking, it is. And also to kind of accept that not every team in the firm has the same appetite for experimentation, for changing things. There's going to be different segmentation when it comes to that, and that's okay, because maybe a certain practice area is dealing with data that is so sensitive that you would need incredible investments upfront into your literally physical infrastructure. I'm talking servers, GPUs, I'm talking hiring people that are able to deploy your proprietary models within the firm, open source models, and that is a huge investment. Maybe this is not where you should start with. Maybe you should start with teams that are already more open towards adopting technology and are more the nature of what they do and the data that they're handling is such that it's low risk to experiment and low effort. I'm talking low-hanging fruits first. Once you get that momentum going, once you see already some cases within the firm that are successful, and that can directly map to added value. Sometimes it's efficiency, but sometimes it's added capability. Sometimes you're able to sign bigger, different clients that you weren't able to sign before just because you became innovative. But sometimes that might work the opposite. Sometimes clients are like, okay, actually for this type of case that I have, let's say that I am divorcing Amber Heard and we have, I don't know, a few $1 million in litigation. I don't want to go and hire somebody that is purely AI first. I don't want to be dealing with a department that outsources the responsibility to a technology. I want to hire the best and I don't care about the cost and efficiency. So yeah, just accepting that there's going to be segmentation, starting with low-hanging fruits first, collect a few cases where it did map to direct value, and expand from there once you do have momentum.
Change management is almost like the third rail on my podcast because I keep saying I'm going to have someone on to talk about this, and I still haven't done it, but I really will.
I can after this I can recommend a few people. They really know their stuff.
I would love that. I would love that because I come into it with a little bit of skepticism as a user, as a legal user. First of all, we got to change the name. Like no lawyer wants to be managed. Let's not call it change management. We'll call it something else. But putting aside the semantics, I think I would add 2 points to your excellent insights on this topic. One is, I think results speak for themselves. And so if lawyers see results or if they hear from their peers about results, that lawyer will very quickly try something out and give it a fair shake. So the number one thing to me is there have to be results. It has to work. And that will create a positive feedback loop in any organization or across organizations. And the other, to me, is also the ease of use, which you've already touched on, I think. To me, the user experience, the user interface, meeting lawyers where they already work is so critical. I think you can ultimately move lawyers onto a new platform. I think that's actually probably what the legal profession needs terribly. We need that for managing our documents, our contracts. We need that for client collaboration desperately. We need to get out of emails. We'll get there. But for now, we're in emails. And so you have to start there. And I think you make it easy to use and you give people results. To me, that's such a big part of success in getting people to use these products. I actually think there's a tipping point that's pretty quick in the adoption.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm seeing as well. And when my former colleagues from an enterprise ask me, why the hell did you go into the legal space? Like, these people do not want to adopt technology. I'm like, I beg to differ.
Experimentation. I really like how you frame that. Experimentation without risk. Earlier, you talked about the need to motivate and empower champions within an organization. Can you just describe to me what tools are we talking about those users using to experiment? How do you set those tools up to ensure security? Are there special governance considerations involved? Because I imagine, again, putting my hat on as a senior lawyer, leadership of a law firm, I hear experimentation and a lot of warning bells go off in my head about security, governance, risk, et cetera. So
yeah,
how do you advise clients to go about that?
That's great. It's the alarms that go off in your head are the right ones. You can't outsource that responsibility to the vendors. It's just not that straightforward. Bigger firms have IT teams that are pretty empowered. They're able to control the traffic that goes in and out of the firm. And you got to collaborate with these people. Gonna really try to explain this so people won't fall asleep. So I'm not getting too technical, but basically setting up a sandbox environment is almost as setting up basically a server that is only accessible to people inside of the firm. The traffic doesn't go out. There's technical ways you can do that. It's pretty bulletproof. This is not something I came up with. This is something that, regulated industries have been using before. finance is heavily regulated. And we've been experimenting within sandbox environments for decades because that's the only way you can get compliant. Second, sometimes that means that you really can't, experiment with the latest and greatest, not with the latest startup tool that just popped up, because they're not compliant. They do not come and, deploy their product on your infrastructure. That means that all the data will leave your firm, and then it's on you to trust your people that they're disciplined enough that they know what is personally identifiable information, which there's a lot of polemics about what is it. The definition constantly keeps on changing. For example, a white car, a woman with a white car is not a PII in New York, but it is in a village with 5 people. So what is PII really? And can you really make sure that it won't leave your firm if the data is leaving your firm, if the tool sits outside of your firm? And so today you have no-code tools, you have platforms that firms are already trusting, such as Microsoft 365. These platforms are connected with the LLMs, with the large language models, that are proprietary to these companies. And so you have Power Automate as well. So you could be, dragging, dropping your way through some of the processes. And this is a great place to start. Vibe coding, that's very tricky, because I think that if you want to stay secure and private, which are two separate things, you really need to know what you're doing. Vibe coding, that's great, but then you have this code that runs where? If you want the person next to you to use the same thing that you just vibe coded, this needs to be deployed somewhere. Does your firm have the infrastructure where it can deploy those things so it doesn't leave the walls of the firm? That would be the next thing to tackle, because if people are going to start experimenting with vibe coding tools, and it makes sense to a certain extent, but it should be only concept development, then this needs to be deployed in a secure way. And the only way to do that is in your infrastructure. So you need to get your IT team involved in these experimentations, because they're the ones that are able to tell you that they're able to secure the experimentation, that are able to create sandboxed environments, and that are also able to inform what is safe and what is not. But then collaboration with lawyers comes very handy, because security, which IT is very knowledgeable about, and privacy is not the same thing. I'm in Europe. In Europe, there's GDPR is a big thing. I think that a lot of US companies are knowledgeable about this as well, especially if they're doing business with Europeans. But for example, when you're vibe coding and you download some sort of open source platform on your laptop, that thing that you downloaded, there is no external party that you can create a contract with. So the risk sits solely within your firm. And now you're making an API call to an OpenAI's LLM. That OpenAI, that you need to do due diligence with that third party. And then maybe you're sending some data to another analytics platform that enables you to create a beautiful dashboard so your colleague can see what is happening. But that third party, that analytics platform, you need to have another due diligence process there. So there's so much more work involved when you start vibe coding and integrating with all these platforms that are around you, that are around us today. So it becomes quite scary. I think it's not a linear thing. Here's a sandbox environment, everything is secure. I think it's an iterative process of coming up with an idea, what to experiment with, going to IT, figuring out how that can be made secure. And it's not always that it can be made secure. And then also involving compliance people and governance people.
Let me share my perspective as a lawyer who would love to tinker and experiment and play. I basically follow all the developments surrounding the different tools and abilities people have to vibe code and develop and think by themselves, the sandboxing, etc. And then I just sit and pray and wait for Enterprise 365 to add something that resembles that capability. And the reason is not because I'm some big Microsoft fan. Microsoft's fine, I have nothing against it, but I'm not some evangelist for Microsoft products. But my company is on 365. And so I have Copilot, I have the other tools, I have Power Automate, right? Power BI, all that stuff. And it's already set up in a secure way, right? And so then I have the comfort that when I use those tools, as long as I follow the governance and the procedures that have been given to me, as long as I follow the rules, I know that it's going to be secure. And that's a comfort that I have. So for me to then even think about doing something outside of that safe kind of sandbox is very frightening. And of course, it also can create significant risk. So yeah, this is the sort of the dichotomy of kind of being online and seeing all this exciting stuff happening. And then, you can tinker with stuff on your own laptop, on your own time using public information. But if you really want to dig in and start coming up with ways in your actual data practice, it gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah. And I don't think that law firms really want to become, especially big ones, they don't want to become tech first. They're not going to be tech companies. We're not going to see, like we saw fintech, we saw math tech. I don't think we're going to see so much law tech when it comes to really organizational changes that we've seen in those other industries. And those other industries, yeah, they can afford engineering teams that can set up all this infrastructure. But I don't think that we're going to really see that in law firms. I don't see the incentive for that. Again, it's the most profitable service industry in the world. The pressures are coming more or less what I'm seeing for streamlining administrative stuff, repetitional stuff, things that can get lawyers to do more lawyering. But I'm not seeing much more than that.
Yeah, I live in a fantasy where you have a platform or an ecosystem that you're using securely. It's been fully onboarded with your organization. And then either internally or externally, people are sort of doing third-party apps or plugins or something like that, where you've got the innovation happening at a very micro level, very driven by the specific needs of your organization, but you're not waiting for it to be deployed by some external party that then has to be onboarded. I guess the downside of that would be maybe there's less options in the end if we don't have a vibrant kind of super competitive marketplace for products, right? Because that's the benefit of products created by external vendors. It's this huge plethora of ideas, right? And most of them will fail, but the really good ones will survive. And that's great. And it's great to have that kind of competition. But I also, on the flip side, see as a user, again, as someone who's trying to actually deploy these things internally in a practical real world, I see a huge benefit for the incumbents and for a consolidation so that you can use and benefit from some experimentation securely.
Yeah. Another thing is, if you create something internally that sits outside of the boundaries of MS365, MS365, they have huge teams. And those are teams that are making sure that, all the badges that should be there are there. SOC2, they're HIPAA compliant, there's ISO standards in their processes, like all of that stuff. But when you create something either with the drag and drop tool, let's say that you're knowledgeable in using NA10, or let's say that you're a great vibe coder, right? Who assessed this tool? Did you hire teams of pen testers that are, trying to probe this? Because every single tool and platform in the world can be hacked. It's a matter of time when it will be, and you want to cover the vast majority of the possibilities, but you will never be 100%. Now, you have teams that are and companies that are specialized in developing a product, and then all the resources go into this, but your main revenue driver is client work. Are you going to be hiring all those specialized teams to make a certain product that was developed in-house really production ready? And also, that's an analogy I used to use. So in order to come up with a product, I need 2 engineers next to me. In order to maintain that same product once it hits the market and is used by a lot of different users, I need to triple my team just to maintain that same product. There's going to be feature requests. There's going to be maintenance there's going to be bugs. There's going to be, my product connects to others. Those others will change. So I need to also keep on updating my product because otherwise it won't work anymore. There's no single software the development never looks, it's one and done. It's always an iteration over iteration. And I think that in law firms, client work always takes preference.
That is such a powerful insight. And one, I think that comes from the fact that you have an engineering background, right? Which is, to me, the bottom line is that law firms that go too quickly and too fast, too far in building out their internal kind of build capabilities might be in for a surprise on the back end, and that they should be thinking about that in advance.
Yeah. There's short-term gains if you judge the book by its covers, but if you're sitting in it for a while, you're gonna probably see a lot of downsides that you have not priced in, and that's important for the strategy.
Okay. I'm going to put my BigLaw hat back on. I'm the senior partner at this law firm. So we've had a great meeting. We've talked about how I already know my business. That's a huge starting point for thinking about how to use technology. I have people in my organization that have great ideas and I can leverage that. I can even give them a sandbox to go experiment in and come up with cool tools. And I can leverage existing resources for helping the plane take off. And also, by the way, this all means that I don't have to spend a lot of money, at least initially, to start making this change. So the money going out is not such a big deal, it sounds like. Now, let's talk about the last part, which is the most important part, which is the money coming in. Let's talk about revenue, because I'm not leaving this meeting without asking the following question, which is, Rok, I've been doing this for 20 years, and we have a business model that leverages associates, billing time by the hour, and that's how we make money as a law firm. And some of what I've been hearing about when it comes to technology is that business model may not thrive in an environment where technology is really streamlining operations and automating things that those associates used to do. So help me understand why I shouldn't just pull the cord on this right now and stop this whole experiment, because I'm going to end up taking money out of my own pocket in the process.
I have so many different things to start with. Sanja's going to pick some. What's your burnout rate amongst the associates?
Oh, well, we've been working on that and with HR to try to keep that low, but got to be honest with you, right as we are really hoping to get the return on investment on those associates, we're seeing a lot of departures, and it is difficult to keep the talent that we want to keep in this environment. It is. So, I don't know what the numbers are, but we wish it was lower.
That's one. Second, how happy are you with the output of the associates across the board? Is it following the same principal standards, or does it deviate a lot?
This is a private conversation, Rok, so I'm going to be honest with you. We have a large variability. We have a number of all-star associates that we are just completely blown away by, and we are all in on them, and we are investing everything we can to grow them into partners at the firm. We have a significant number of associates that are good performing. They hit their billable targets. But, over time, we think natural attrition in the industry will probably cause many of those associates not to be here in 3 to 5 years. And I think they're okay with that. We're okay with that.
Okay. In order to answer this, I have to ask you 2 more small questions. Amongst the partners, what is the divide between we're not moving fast enough with adopting technology and they're leaving because of that to firms that are, compared to the ones that are saying, you're moving too fast. I don't like this. I have clients that don't like this. I'm just going to take my books and my clients and I'm going to leave. What is the divide here? And it could be hypothetical, like fictional scenario.
Yeah, it's Rock, there's a few major rainmakers at the firm that say we're going too quick and we're losing sight of really what's our strategic advantage. We have a large number of partners that are curious and interested, but not super motivated. And then we have maybe, let's say 15, 20% who are really motivated by technology and are pushing us as an organization to deploy more tech.
What about the talent coming in from universities? Do they want, how many of them, yeah, percentage wise again, what is the proportion that doesn't want to join your firm because you don't yet have the latest and greatest legal tech and legal AI tools?
Certainly, we are hearing from our recruiting team that there's a need to promote ourselves as being very tech forward for the recruiting side. Absolutely. That's a big part of building our brand to be able to recruit the top talent, is to be able to say, you're going to be using technology, which means you're going to be doing higher value work and less of the grunt work that the previous generation might have had to do as a first year lawyer out of school.
Okay, I can answer. Thank you for that. That was much needed context. I think that efficiency doesn't have to be net total at the end of the process. You could be more efficient in certain parts of the process while still not saving time net total. Maybe associates are able to use certain tools that you approve in-house because they align very well with everything we talked about before. And they're able to come up much faster with some sort of a draft. Maybe those tools enable those associates to come up with, they raise the lower barrier. So on average, the work product that comes from the associates to partners, to the first reviewers, is much better and saves time of the first reviewers. Maybe these people can now spend time on getting the draft to the next level without having to check all those things that they have been checking before, the, so to speak, manual things that generally had to be changed. Maybe they don't have to do that anymore because the technology did that. Now they can spend their time on more high value work. And maybe net total, you won't be saving any more time, but maybe your work products are going to increase in quality overall. Maybe you're going to be spending, oh man, sometimes I really wish I would have been born as a native English speaker. Sometimes a word leaves me, but the mental strain might lower overall. You might be more attractive by being able to put technology and innovation, phrases like this, front and center, and you might be more attractive for new talent. And I think that AI, it can be bought off the shelf as it is, but it could also be carved within your boundaries and constraints. And in that case, it can really provide a lot of value to you. But you should be really thinking about, is efficiency and saving time what we're going for? Because if it is, maybe, and I said that to a client and we stopped working at that point together because they were just not the firm that should be looking in adopting AI. This is also the possibility. I don't believe it's a technology that should be, and here is where I'm going against the popular opinion. I do not think this is technology that is for every single one. An example was, and we can leave it at that, an example was a firm that had 25 partners and 50 associates. So every partner had 2 associates and they were trusting them. Now associates were using AI through shadow AI use, and all of a sudden partners' review time increased significantly. Mm-hmm. Because the work product wasn't following the same rules that they've set and the same constraints. And so in that case, it did not make sense to be more efficient because the review time increased. And at the same time, even if they would be net total 20% more efficient and 20% cheaper, signing one high net worth client would get them to grow in revenue much more than the efficiency gains would be able to save. So in that case, it did not make sense to push the technology.
And to come back to where we started, to me, that is a perfect example of the unique value that an advisor or consultant offers, as opposed to someone who is perhaps selling a product. Because I imagine that's the kind of advice that you don't typically get from a external vendor who is selling an AI tool, right? So that's actually really valuable and helpful. And I completely agree that, this is my words, the role that these tools have in being a competitive differentiator in some ways may be important to consider beyond just streamlining cost savings, et cetera. Because when I think about the questions that lawyers are getting from clients, I hear a lot of clients asking, are you using AI? Are you using innovative tools? Sort of the question I posed to you earlier today, playing that role. But I think the question they should be asking, and then eventually will be asking, is more like, are you winning the case that I need you to win? Are you getting terms in this big M&A transaction that I need you to get? You're doing a pitch, right? I'm going to say, convince me that if I hire you for my multi-million-dollar litigation, that you're going to win the case. And I think in response to that, law firms will probably increasingly talk about the tools they use to achieve better results and outcomes. And to me, that would be a better framing, a better question and answer. And maybe it goes back to also something you said earlier, which is, what's the real problem, right? Like solving problems as opposed to just throwing technology at something.
Yeah. I really agree with that. And I'm hoping we're going to soon go back to that part, to that market where people are going to be looking at the value and not the driver, the vehicle. Because I see AI and any other technology as a vehicle. And we're focusing on vehicles so much. We should be focusing on the value.
I think it's a shortcut at a time when people don't understand the technology very well. They don't understand the implications. Things are changing so fast. And so the shortcut becomes, hey, what AI tools are you using? But I think that shortcut goes away as people get more comfortable with exactly what you're saying, which is, well, okay, I really need to worry about it, the results and the outcome. And the mix of technology, it's the lawyer who I'm going to have a relationship with day to day. It's all these other factors that have been around forever and will be around forever at law firms.
Yeah. That's actually what lawyers are telling me. Like, we had technology before, and now the same problems that were promised to be solved by previous waves of legal tech are again re-promised to be solved by AI. But is it really the case? Yeah, let's see. 2026 is going to be an exciting one.
Thank you so much, Rok, for coming onto the podcast. This has been a really engaging conversation, and I really like getting your advisor consultant perspective, because I think you are embedded with these organizations and leaders at these organizations in a way that many of us are not. We may have insight into one company or one law firm, but don't often get to speak to someone who has insight into how many law firms or leaders within these organizations are thinking. So thank you for bringing that.
Thank you so much for having me. That was my first interview. I'm usually a podcaster. That was my first one, so I was really nervous, but you made it really, really nice for me. Thank you.
Sure, you're in the hot seat. It's kind of like, I litigated quite a bit in my career before I went in-house, and I always wanted to be deposed because I feel like I took so many depositions and I got really good at being the person asking the questions. But I developed a lot of empathy for being in the seat and receiving the questions. And I don't want to be sued, to be clear, please. No one is filed a lawsuit for this purpose, but maybe a simulated deposition at some point would be an interesting experience to go.
Yeah. I wanted to actually invite you to my podcast. Yes. Yeah, because
I would be happy to. Yeah, I would be happy to. That'd be great.
That'd be really cool.
All right. Well, then to be continued. This conversation is to be continued.
Yeah.